Thank you so much. Thank you, David, for the invitation back and this precious community. Every time I have come in here, it's just such a loving, sweet essence. So thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome. I appreciate it. And so grateful to be here. And so what happens sometimes with my talks is that spirit leads me down paths I would have not necessarily chosen. And this was sort of one of them, because How to Train Your Dragon. It was when my children were young, it was their favorite movie. And I remember this movie among all of the other children's movies I watched over the years, raising 4 children. I've given away oodles of their old toys over the years, but I kept the dragons in a box because these dragons meant so much to them. They'd run around the house, with their arms raised, just maneuvering these dragons all over, because they weren't the kind of dragons to fear and to slay. They loved these dragons. These were dragons that brought fun and adventure and peace and so much love to them, to the house. So this children's animated movie begins by meeting a young, sensitive Viking boy named Hiccup. And he begins the whole movie by narrating, and he says, "My village, in a word, is sturdy. It's been here for 7 generations. We have fishing, hunting, and a charming view of the sunsets. The only problems are the pests. You see, most places have mice or mosquitoes. We have dragons. Most people would leave, but not us. We're Vikings. We have stubbornness issues." So that's how the movie begins. And Hiccup's father is the leader of this community, and he intends for Hiccup to become the eventual leader, a Viking leader of this mountainside community. And Hiccup is determined to prove his worth to the tribe by becoming this dragon slayer. But he doesn't really have any interest in killing dragons. But since it's what's expected of him, and he knows that he would be a terrible disappointment to his dad if he doesn't, so he attempts to prove himself as this dragon slayer warrior. And in the attempt, he only wounds this fierce black dragon instead of killing him. And what happens is the dragon's tail gets injured and he can't fly. So then Hiccup begins to feel sorry for him that now he can't fly, so he can't get food. And he ends up approaching the dragon. And then rather than experiencing fear of the dragon or triumph that he's hurt the dragon or defeated the dragon, the boy looks into the wounded dragon's eyes and he empathizes with this beast. And he said that when he looked into his eyes, he saw himself. And so after Hiccup, the boy, bonds with the dragon, he names him Toothless, and then he designs this dragon a prosthetic tail fin that would allow him to fly again. And so in that moment, Hiccup makes the choice to follow a peacemaker's path instead of a dragon slayer's path. And so this whole story is very sweet. And when children are young, there's often this period of time when they fear the monsters in the closet or the monsters under the bed. And if you were a fortunate child, you had a hero parent or some caregiver that would come in to rescue you and slay the beasts and look under the bed and in the closet, like the legend of St. George, who comes and puts a stop to that vicious dragon who needed a human sacrifice every month or every year, or whatever it was. Or there's the many legends of St. Michael, known as the supreme archangel who headed up the heavenly armies and defeats the monster during the War of Angels. So it's been a very ingrained position in many cultures and religions to fight against evil or battle the darkness. This depiction of St. George or Archangel Michael are only just a couple of these examples about slaying the dragon or slaying the darkness. In European and American culture, the dragon has most often represented a ferocious, dangerous creature to be feared. And then in the East, dragons are often revered as powerful and benevolent beings. So it seems, though, that any of these stories about slaying dragons is an obvious outward conflict between light and darkness, chaos and order, like the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra, the bringer of light, was against this great enemy Ra, which was known as the Lord of Chaos. Again, a serpent from the Nile, an evil dragon. So this dark versus light, age-old battle story And regarding the darkness, and specifically evil dragons and monsters, I have such deep appreciation for something the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said in his 1886 book, Beyond Good and Evil. He said, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. If you gaze into the abyss long enough, the abyss will gaze back into you. So be careful hunting monsters, lest you become one yourself. Because when you gaze into the abyss, it gazes back, it tells you what you're made of. You know, it's you might be surprised that you're going to find the heroine and hero and monster. You all have heard about the light in me sees the light in you. And so it goes the other direction as well, right? So thinking about this deep meaning of this quote of Nietzsche's caveat of being careful hunting monsters lest you become one, it reminds me of the power of the Ho'oponopono prayer. Ho'oponopono, if you don't know about it, is an ancient Hawaiian practice, a prayer of forgiveness and reconciliation. And I learned about it through a story of Dr. Hugh Len and how he cured an entire ward of criminal mentally ill patients using this method. And so what he would do is he would arrive to the ward every morning, and he never actually made personal visits with the inmates. He would just browse through their files, look at their pictures, look at the information about them. And strangely enough, things started to change in the mental ward. And he worked there for almost 4 years. And during that period, prisoners were released. The clinic was eventually closed down because barely any inmates were left there. And when he was asked what caused the patients to change, what was he doing? His answer was, I was simply healing the part of me that created them. He believed that total responsibility for your life means that everything in your life is simply your responsibility because it's in your life. It's, in a literal sense, the entire world is your creation. And so Dr. Hugh Len says that the Ho'oponopono is the process of where we say to the divine, this is it, I love you, unification. I'm sorry, repentance. Please forgive me, forgiveness, and thank you, transmutation. And so it's just that's the prayer. And part of the reason why this traditional Hawaiian healing ritual is so powerful is that it first requires a person to acknowledge that the dark you see in others is within you too. It may not be manifest in you outwardly or look like it does in someone else, but it's part of the recognition is that we're acknowledging the darkness exists, and it exists in order for us to integrate it and bring that dark into the light. So this prayer acknowledges love both for yourself and for other people. And this is really important part is the darkness isn't something to fight off, or fight away, or ward off. Carl Jung, many of us know, Swiss psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, he's recognized as one of the most influential psychiatrists of all time. He felt that if we only want to acknowledge the light, which of course feels good and we like being there, but this one-sidedness will create an artificial view of life in which our dark side is buried and considered taboo. And so because of that, people will then lean into a persona he calls a false social mask. And so authenticity opens the path towards self-realization. And to achieve self-realization, we must not repress, hide, or ignore our darkness, but rather confront it, acknowledge it, embrace it so that we can live authentically. The darkness or the shadow side is everything we feel within that we don't really wish to be or to feel or to see. This shadow might be called ego, it might be called trauma response, it might be false beliefs, but it's not evil and it's not an enemy to us. The shadow contains pure gold as psychological insight to be integrated into our personality. So this could be anger issues, it could be unhealthy attachment wounds, it could be fears of abandonment or unworthiness, sadness, despair, grief, shame, unconscious circuits that were wired in us that say, if I'm authentic and show my true self, show my vulnerability, I may be left alone or ostracized from the family or from the church or the peer group. So what happens is we must make friends with this darkest part of ourselves. We must feel this place and acknowledge it, And we can't have stubbornness issues like the Vikings, for we're alchemists. And so as alchemists, we're transmuting energy. If everything is energy, then what we do is we take the power in the dark and we bring it into the light. And that brings us to completeness, because we know that there's no light without darkness. And so there's no psychic wholeness without imperfection. I love the affirmations we were meditating on today. And what we're talking about wholeness, because to be authentic is to show up in that completeness, in that wholeness. If we think of the yin yang, the Taoist symbol, the circle composed of the interlocking swirls that kind of look like teardrops, one black, one white, and each swirl has a dot of the opposite color in it. And it shows a balance between two opposites with the portion of the opposite in each element. So this is duality of yin and yang, and it's an indivisible whole. And the wholeness is where we find the authenticity, having both parts. So I looked up what authentic is defined as, and it's defined as not false or copied. It's genuine, real, representing one's true natures or beliefs, true to oneself. So Brené Brown said, to be authentic, we must cultivate the courage to be imperfect and vulnerable. We have to believe that we are fundamentally worthy of love and acceptance, just as we are. I've learned that there's no better way to invite more grace, gratitude, and joy into our lives than by mindfully practicing authenticity. So authenticity is about our congruence between our deeper values and beliefs. We might call this our divine nature, or our true essence, or our essential self, and our actions. So it's a congruence between those two, who we show up as in the world. And as we explore living an authentic life, I invite us to not only embrace that hero or heroine, the light within, but also to embrace that dragon within, which might be represented as darkness, if we want something we want to avoid. So back to Hiccup and that young Viking boy and his dragon. His Viking father wanted him to kill dragons. And as he spends time with this wounded dragon, he realizes that these creatures aren't the monsters the Vikings have always talked about them to be. Instead, he discovers that this beast is gentle, a loving friend, and he's breathing fire only because it's his defense, because he's being attacked by these Vikings. So how do we train our dragon and live authentically? So we're going to explore 3 lessons from Hiccup's journey and the journey of the children's movie, How to Train Your Dragon. And lesson 1 is embrace your truth. Oscar Wilde said, be true to yourself, or be yourself. Everyone else is taken. So in other words, be true to yourself. So Hiccup knew he wasn't a dragon slayer, and he had to be true to himself. So he decided to face the uncomfortable reality of his situation and live by his code of morals and values. So be true to yourself is fundamental to living a life of integrity, and therefore living your authenticity. So as we lean into life's adventures and decisions from an authentic space, we can no longer live from that persona, that false social mask that Jung spoke of. So we get to ask, who am I? What is my belief? Not my father's or my priest or my neighbor or my teacher. What is my belief? So I like the story of the metaphorical empty garden plot that we were given when we were born, and our parents and our caregivers and our teachers and our clergy and our society, our culture, peers, whoever was involved in our lives growing up, planted in our garden, belief systems, judgments, ideas, opinions, and we adapt and create in that space. And as my dear friend TJ Woodward would call them, we create brilliant strategies to survive. And survival can look like being accepted, being praised, being included. And so we're just adapting to the environments that we grow up in. And then around age 18, we're handed our garden plot, and maybe it's now full of rose bushes or succulents. And if we never stop to ask, what plants, aka beliefs, do I want growing in my garden? We'll just go on potentially living by belief systems, conditions, programs that aren't actually ours. We didn't plant them. We just we're allowing them to take up a space in our being. For instance, these could look like beliefs as this runs in my family. I'm a failure. I'm just not good or capable of that. I'm clumsy. This is just my luck. Money doesn't grow on trees. Nobody likes me. Just sort of that lack and limitation talk. I call these core false beliefs or habit energies because they just become habits. And so we've all heard this piece about authenticity, and it means be true to yourself. But how can we be true to ourselves until we know who that true self is? And it's not that outward persona. So it requires us to inquire within and follow through to awaken our authenticity. And often this means taking inventory, looking into the eyes of the dark and uncomfortable. And let's be the compassionate observer here, not the critical judge of ourselves. It is a training of sorts. We wouldn't show up to a 5K marathon never having run a lap. So this is where we can have grace with ourselves when asking this vital question: is this my belief or someone else's? We don't have to judge or act harsh with ourselves. It's a new moment. We get to choose anew. So always having that grace with ourselves, because then that means we can be that same grace for other people. We can hold that safe space. So our second lesson is embrace your passion. So sometimes you just have to toss out the instructions, be present, go with the flow, live in the moment, and be a great listener to life. So a good question here might be, what does life want from me? What draws the life force alive in me? So back to Hiccup, the boy, he attached that prosthetic tail fin to his new fierce flying friend, and he hops on the dragon's back. And so he's designed this gear that he's going to shift with his foot to be sure that they can fly properly through the air. And as they're flying, he's created this manual he's got on the dragon's back, and he's really in his head in this moment. He's really not in the moment. He's struggling to hold the book, to read the book, to follow the directions. He's full of tension when suddenly a big gust of wind grabs this instruction manual and it flies off. So here's the boy and the dragon flying through, swooping through the trees and the mountains, and he just finds himself on his own there. And so all he can do is lean in, get closer to the dragon's back, hold on, and begin to flow. And in the moment, listening to the great knowing of life, the shifting of the gears just becomes easy and effortless. And because he's there, present in the moment, passionate about what he's doing, then that's when they begin to really fly. And they're just cutting through the blue sky. And by embracing his passion, which wasn't the popular choice in his community, he was able to be true to himself and create the positive change. So we awaken our authenticity by trusting the flow. And it takes courage to become the flow. The courage takes vulnerability. And as we lean in and allow our inner wisdom, our true nature to emerge, to guide us, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, and to be trusted. There's a possibility when we talk about how to walk the spiritual path and be in that flow and trust that flow. All the ideas seem practical and doable when life is smooth and things are going well and our nervous systems aren't depleted or reactive. But what about when life shows up messy and it's not like the lazy river version? Then what? How do we go with the flow then? And it's really truly been my spiritual practices that have always guided me back to that truth, and giving me the ability to stay in the divine flow, whatever's showing up. So for example, 2 weeks ago, my young adult son fell down the stairs in the middle of the night. He had a seizure for the first time, and we went to the ER for 8 hours, got home, got into bed, and it happened again less than 12 hours later. He fell down the flight of stairs again. So again, we're on the phone with 911, and my amygdala, which is our survival part of our brain, is totally activated. This was like fight flight situation for my nervous system. In the moment, I'm terrified. He's convulsing, and then I think he's, collapsed in my arms after he stops convulsing. And the dispatcher's on the phone, and I'm with her on the phone, and there's all these questions, and it just feels heavy, and it doesn't feel productive to me. And so I suddenly tune into my inner wisdom, my inner knowing, and I embrace my passion, which is to be the great listener of the spirit. And I start to sort of ignore the phone, and I just begin to fiercely pray, speak life over him, life force into him, declaring dominion over his life. And, the dispatcher's on the phone asking about this and that, but I'm just a fierce prayer warrior. And so now in this moment, when I tune into who I am, into the flow, into my passion, my nervous system begins to calm down. And then I was able to gently guide myself out of that chaos and find balance in that dark moment. And so life is always presenting us with opportunities. Emily Cady, who is an American homeopathic physician, she's the author of Lessons in Truth. It's a Unity textbook. She said, no matter how evil, we might use different words now, but no matter how evil circumstances appear or how much it may seem that some other personality is at the foundation of your sorrow or trouble, God, good alone, is really there when you call his law into expression. So let your passion shine, because that is the radiant light of God coming through you, in, through, and as you. So the third lesson I gained from my children's favorite childhood movie is to embrace the unknown, remaining open to new ideas, new opportunities, and new ways of thinking and being in the world. Authenticity asks that we live by our code of values, but when it comes to everyday opinions and people and events and life circumstances, that authenticity is about being open at the top. One of the co-founders of Unity Church we know so well, Charles Fillmore, said, let us remain open at the top for further understanding. And I believe that remaining open at the top, open for new understanding, as he mentioned it, is like the Zen proverb about the scholar who visited the Zen master for advice. And the scholar was full of all of his own opinions and knowledge. He interrupted the master repeatedly during the interaction with his stories, and he failed to listen to anything the master was saying. So finally, the Zen master calmly suggested they have some tea. And so he poured some tea for the scholar until the cup was filled. And he kept pouring until the cup was overflowing onto the table. And then finally, the scholar, yelled, "Stop, the cup is full. Can't you see?" Exactly. The Zen master had replied to him, "You're like the cup. You're so full, nothing more will fit in. So come back to me with an empty cup." Embracing the unknown means to open ourselves to new insight, allow new wisdom to emerge, and a willingness to change our preconceptions. So we might say, perhaps it's time to plant some vegetable plants in our garden instead of the rose bushes. And because you remained open to new perspectives, you're able to realize this, and you just don't continue clipping the roses. You plant something else. So to be authentic means to be open-minded, because you're continually asking, who am I today? Not 10 years ago or yesterday or even 10 minutes ago. What is mine to do? Who am I today? So if we're ever evolving and growing and listening within, we won't stagnate. We'll stay into this question. We'll stay in the momentum. Ultimately, life is about perspective, and our perspective creates our reality. The lens through which we view everything creates our experience through all of our opportunities, events, people, and life. Joe Dispenza said, as long as you're thinking equal to your environment, you'll keep creating the same life. To truly change is to think greater than your environment. And Steve Jobs said something similar to that. He said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward, because that's all you know. That's the only place you've been. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever is what he said. So Hiccup opened his mountainside community to a new way of seeing the dragons, and therefore a new way of living. It reminded me of the dragons in the latest Avatar movie. I'm sounding like a huge movie buff, and actually I really don't watch too many movies. But as a mom, I end up finding myself in movie theaters watching movies my children would like to see, but I always find the deeper spiritual meaning in every single one of them. It's kind of fun. But the dragons in the latest Avatar movie are adaptable. And so if they live in the forest, they have short tails to trek through the land masses. And if they are the dragons who are companions to those on the reef, and they're in the sea, they have thick, powerful tails to sort of glide across the oceans. And they're loving, and they're dedicated, and they're sacred companions to their clan. So I view this as an excellent metaphor about how to use all parts of ourselves to trek, glide, essentially dance into wholeness, integrating the dark, the fierce dragon within, and the light, that light being that we are, our essence. So embracing both is really necessary for balance and healing. And I like that it came up today too, that, I refer to healing as returning to wholeness, returning to that completeness. So remember Hiccup at the beginning of the movie? He started narrating by saying, "My village," in a word, is sturdy. And it's been here for 7 generations. We have fishing, we have hunting, charming view of the sunsets. The only problems are the pests. You see, most places they have mice or mosquitoes. We have dragons. Then he ends the movie by saying, "This village is Burke. It snows 9 months of the year here and hails the other 3. Any food that grows here is tough and tasteless. The people that grow here are even more so. The only upsides are the pets. While other places have ponies or parrots, we have dragons." Same thoughts always lead to same choices. Same choices lead to same behavior, and same behaviors lead to same experiences, and the same experiences produce the same emotions, and these emotions drive the very same thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Joe Dispenza, for that message. And so if we decide that they are pests, then it is so. And if we decide they are pets that we love, then it is so. So watch out for becoming rigid and dogmatic about the dragons you wish to slay within yourself and within others, because you might become one if you're not careful. And don't be afraid of that sleeping dragon that may have been suppressed for a long time. Look it in the eye, hold it, make friends with it, acknowledge it, find and embrace your truth. Be present to the moment to feel your passionate life force emerge and guide you, and remain open at the top for greater understanding, embracing the unknown. Because when you do, there's a mighty good chance that that dragon will go from being scary and vicious to your benevolent best friend, just like Hiccup and Toothless the dragon. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.